Hi, welcome to the ACE-IT podcast. We come to you from the Center for Advancing Correctional Excellence, ACE, at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, and via the Coordination and Translation Center, CTC, of the National Institute on Drug Abuse's Justice Opioid Community Innovation Network, or JCOIN. I'm your host, Danielle Rudes, Associate Professor of Criminology, Law, and Society, and the Deputy Director at ACE, and one of the leads on the capacity building core of the CTC for JCOIN. This podcast is all about translating science into sense. It's about helping criminal justice practitioners, students, and everyday people learn about cool developments in the justice research world, but without all the dryness of the ivory tower. There's a lot of really great research out there, and we'd like to bring it to you in bite-sized doses to help you understand it and be able to use it. No PhD required. Each episode will break down scientific research into a 12 to 15-minute podcast. You can listen to it wherever you are and when it's convenient for you. We'll give you the science, but in a way that makes sense. We also finish with an explanation that translates the research into real words that explain why it's important and how and why you might want to use it. So, let's get started. Texas, Oregon, Massachusetts, and Arkansas seemingly have little in common. They are geographically different, politically varied, and demographically diverse. One is landlocked, 2 have southern twangs, 2 have tremendous mountain ranges, and 3 have excellent college football teams. But all 4 of them have a local jurisdiction which successfully implemented the HOPE program. That's the Honest Opportunity Probation Enforcement program. HOPE supervision is characterized by regular random drug testing and swift, certain, and fair responses to any violations of the conditions of probation, including positive or missed drug screenings. Treatment is usually reserved for those who reportedly failed drug tests. However, before Judge Stephen Alm of Hawaii established the original HOPE program, as he believed future offending might be mitigated through swift, certain, and fair sanctions, there was another scholar, Cesar Beccaria, who first established these principles. Although Beccaria may not be a household name to you, his work profoundly influenced the founding fathers and the theoretical development of the American justice system and punishment. He believed people make rational choices, and to prevent crime, you must leverage rational decision-making. Specifically, he said to deter future offending, punishment must not be severe, but rather, punishment must be certain and swiftly administered. If there is a known consequence, and this consequence is certain, and it happens quickly, people will rationally choose not to continue that behavior. This is the essence of deterrence theory, and the theoretical framework from which swift and certain sanction programs are based. Today, we'll take a mini road trip around the country to discuss the findings from a demonstration field experiment assessing the effectiveness of the swift and certain framework guiding HOPE in 4 jurisdictions. This podcast episode reviews a published research article entitled Summary of Findings from the National Evaluation of the Honest Opportunity Probation Enforcement Demonstration Field Experiment, the HOPE DFE Evaluation. The research was conducted by Pamela Lattimore, Debbie Dawes, and Stephen Tuller of RTI, and Doris McKenzie, Gary Zijak, and Elaine Arsenault at Pennsylvania State University. But before we pack some snacks and head for the open road, we'll need to revisit a few landmark moments of the swift, certain, and fair journey. Here's the science and a bit of history. In 2004, then Circuit Court Judge Stephen Alm, with the help of various stakeholders, designed and implemented HOPE for Oahu, Hawaii. Following optimistic NIJ-funded evaluation conducted by Dr. Angela Hawken and colleagues of Hawaii's HOPE project, researchers found HOPE probationers were 55% less likely to be arrested for a new crime and 72% less likely to use drugs. As a result, many jurisdictions began to emulate the core components of the project. Specifically, in 2012, funded by the Bureau of Justice Assistance, 4 jurisdictions agreed to implement a strict replication of Hawaii's HOPE program, including its core components. Now stay with me a minute. I need to get you familiar with the 11 core components grounding HOPE. Here we go. The program must target moderate and high-risk probationers. As part of the sanction-based system, a warning hearing must be part of the initial graduated sanction. There is also an initial drug testing frequency, of at least 8 screens within the first 2 months with an accompanied step down in drug testing frequency to a minimum of 1 random screen a month as a probationer reports negative screens. There must also be explicit consequences for missing drug tests. If a probationer is violated, the violation hearing must be held within 3 days of the violation, and a sanction must be rendered at the violation hearing and applied within 3 days of the hearing. Lastly, jail or confinement must exist as a principal sanction, but can only be imposed for a maximum of 19 days. These core practices embody the ideas of Beccaria and many reform advocates who urge non-draconian punishments. They appeal to many community stakeholders as they hold probationers accountable for continued drug use and failure to comply with general court conditions. By and large, these main principles, swiftness, certainty, and fairness, are not too different from the way we render consequences to employees, children, or even our dogs. Its foundation feels familiar and in accordance with the ways we'd like to see justice rendered and accountability upheld. So, between August and October of 2012, 4 jurisdictions, Saline County, Arkansas, Essex County, Massachusetts, Clackamas County, Oregon, and Tarrant County, Texas, all agreed to strictly implement these core components. Following implementation, researchers from the firm RTI International and in conjunction with Pennsylvania State University's Justice Center for Research assessed the effectiveness of the replication site's efforts to reduce drug use, probation revocations, new arrests, and reconvictions, and begins our demonstration experiment road trip. First stop, Tarrant County, Texas, home to Fort Worth and Cowboy Stadium. Tarrant County implemented all 11 core components of the program, but failed to conduct at least 80% of violation hearings within 3 days of the violation. Although they did meet the 60% threshold, researchers found the rates of recidivism across 4 measures were lower for probationers diverted to the HOPE program compared to those being supervised without the HOPE program. However, these differences were not statistically significant. This suggests these reductions happened by chance and are not attributable to the program itself. Passengers, don't give up hope. See what I did there? We all have 3 more replication sites to visit. Just a few thousand miles away in the Pacific Northwest, we journey to our second stop, Clackamas County, Oregon. This county is just outside Portland, where you can find Mount Hood, the potentially active stratovolcano in the Cascade Volcanic Arc of Oregon. Similar to the Texas jurisdiction, Clackamas County implemented many, in fact 10, of the 11 core components of the program. However, they were unable to conduct at least 60% of violation hearings within 3 days of the violation. HOPE probationers at this site were more likely than probation as usual probationers to experience a probation revocation, and there was no significant difference in the 3 remaining recidivism measures between these 2 groups. All right, let's pick up some voodoo donuts down in Portland and make our way back to the East Coast. Passing through Boise, Omaha, Chicago, Cleveland, and Albany, we make it to our third stop, Essex County, Massachusetts. Famous for their 1692 witch trials, this jurisdiction tells a similar story. Like Clackamas, Oregon, this jurisdiction also did not conduct at least 60% of the violation hearings within 3 days of the violation, and researchers found no differences between new arrests or new convictions among HOPE probationers compared to probation as usual. Before we're completely hopeless, let's pack it back up and head south for our last replication site. Formed in 1835 and part of the Little Rock metropolitan area, Saline County was named for the saltwater or brine springs in the area. The jurisdiction implemented 10 of the 11 core components of HOPE, but similar to Essex and Clackamas, could not conduct at least 60% of the violation hearings within 3 days of the violation. Similar to Clackamas, researchers found HOPE probationers were more likely than their counterparts to experience a probation revocation and new conviction. Researchers suggested the increased surveillance of the program may have led to higher revocations compared to probation as usual, which employs fewer screens and fewer opportunities for formal punishment. Lastly, HOPE probationers were no more likely than their peers to have a new arrest. This was not the road trip we were expecting either. Although the original 2012 and follow-up May 2016 evaluation indicated the original HOPE program reduced probation violations and drug use, Recidivism outcomes in the 4 HOPE replication sites were similar to traditional probationers. In 2 sites, HOPE probationers experienced higher revocations, and in 1 HOPE site, HOPE probationers experienced higher revocations. So, here's the sense. Despite these discouraging findings regarding HOPE's ability to reduce recidivism, researchers state, quote, "A model of strict accountability with non-draconian penalties for violations of conditions can be successfully implemented in a variety of settings with divergent organizational relationships between the courts, probation, and law enforcement," unquote. This suggests that programs or practices identifying core components can be pulled from the shelf and used by organizations to increase justice-involved individuals' accountability, despite the usual inner and outer setting factors typically at odds with change. As we head home from our swift and certain journey, we might feel discouraged or overwhelmed by agency options or practices effective in reducing recidivism. However, we must remain reflective on what we've learned. First, as researchers and agencies continue to partner to evaluate practices, the field is more able to quickly eliminate ineffective practices and make room for potentially rewarding ones. This is the process of science. Second, employing practices that do not immediately result in confinement or overly severe penalties suggests, as a field, we are reestablishing a new version of accountability, justice, and punishment. Together, these messages should excite and inspire you to take the road less traveled. That wraps another episode of the ACEDIT podcast, where we translate science into sense. Also, remember, you can find one-page summary overviews written in plain language and short knowledge bursts, which are essentially 30-second overviews of all the research we cover on the JCOIN website. Our conveniently packaged research summaries may help you remember what you heard here, and they will definitely help you translate this research to your staff, friends, colleagues, or students. Additionally, we'd like to thank NIDA, Dr. Faye Taxman, and all the students and staff at ACE, including our podcast mastermind, Shannon Magnuson, who is the brainchild behind this podcast. 2 additional notes. If you're a researcher and you'd like us to consider using your research for an upcoming podcast, send it to me at rudes@gmu.edu. If you'd like to support our podcast to keep the sense coming, tell your colleagues and staff about ACEDIT or assign us to your students. Thanks for listening. Please tune in again soon for another episode of the ACEDIT podcast, where we translate science into sense.